For this video, what I want to talk about is how do we deal with derealized preoccupations. So derealized preoccupations is a name for the class of preoccupations that people will have, the worries, the catastrophic thinking that people will have during the state of panic. That sounds something along the lines of, oh my God, I think I'm going crazy. Oh my God, I think I'm going to lose control over myself and do something stupid. Oh my gosh, what if I get locked up in a nut house? So how do we deal with these? It's really the same thing that we do with every other preoccupation. It's just that the things that we typically have to reality test are a little bit different. So the basic protocol is the same as always. We need exposure, right? So we got to do exposure, meaning that we have to find ways of setting off the state of panic in small incremental ways. We don't want to just set it off, boom, fully, right? We want to find ways that will set it off in small, tiny ways. A lot of times when people come to me with these kinds of problems, with panic problem, and derealized preoccupations are part of the picture. One of the things that we can do to set it off is hyperventilation. So just taking deep, rapid breaths, let's just say starting with, for example, 5 in a row, can oftentimes jumpstart the panic cycle. If you're not familiar with the panic cycle, feel free to check out the other videos on this channel or check out my blog. You can read some articles on this stuff that might be helpful for you to understand. I don't want to rehash all the same concepts that I covered in previous videos because then these videos are going to be crazy long. So once you start hyperventilating, for most people, that will jumpstart the panic cycle. A lot of times, so if you've been listening to my other videos, you already know that the panic cycle is always related to how you feel your stress response in your body. So different people have different ways of expressing it, but there really are commonalities across all individuals. And they usually have symptoms that resemble cardiac events. So tight chest tightness, difficulty taking a deep breath, maybe even pains here and there. Believe it or not, when you're feeling these pains in your chest, if you have cardiac preoccupations, like, oh my gosh, there's something wrong with my heart, it's actually muscle tightness shooting from your back. Your back is so locked up that it's actually shooting all the way into your chest. But it could also be just here, the rib cage, just totally constricted. Then there's also, so that's a very common stress expression, right? Stress symptom, tightness in the chest. I mean, tightness everywhere, really. Then we have respiratory preoccupations. Again, when you're in a state of panic, when you're stressed out, you're breathing quickly, very deeply. As a matter of fact, a lot of things change in your body. During the state of fight or flight, your bronchial, I'm not a biologist, but your lungs, right? The soft tissue inside of in your lung actually opens up more. And you're actually absorbing more oxygen. So each one of your breaths becomes a lot more efficient. So you might even feel like you're not breathing super fast, but your body is actually absorbing a whole lot more oxygen, right? Your body is getting ready to fight a tiger, is getting ready to fight for your life. So it's optimizing everything for its survival. It's optimizing your muscles to act in a more powerful, robust way. So delivering a lot of oxygen is one of those things. And then last preoccupation, that's the one we're going to be focusing on today, is derealized preoccupation. So when we get stressed out, there's a very common psychological defense mechanism that kicks in, and that's depersonalization, derealization. A lot of times when that's happening, sometimes we will also feel, so one thing, we will feel detached, right? It's kind of like we're here, but we're not really here. And the other thing that a lot of times will coincide with that is maybe a little bit of dizziness. And so hyperventilation sets off a lot of them. So when you hyperventilate, not only will your heart rate increase, you will feel like you're having a difficulty getting air, even though you're breathing a whole lot, but it will mimic those same sensations that you have when you are in a fight or flight scenario or in a fight or flight state. And also, because of that little lightheadedness that it creates, it can also mimic some of those feelings you have when you get depersonalized, derealized, right? So that's really what we want to do. We want to set off a little baby version of a panic attack. Now, if hyperventilation doesn't work for you, we have to find out what are your primary preoccupations. If your primary concern during a panic attack is that you're going to lose your mind, then out of all of the different things that we can try interoceptively, so interoceptive exposure is just another form of exposure. So like hyperventilation is an example of interoceptive exposure. There really aren't that many options left. Usually hyperventilation, it's either going to hit it or it's not. If it's not, then we have to look for triggers, other triggers. So if you don't have too many interoceptive triggers, some people don't. Some people are just very situation specific. Then we have to look to those situations. So for example, you might say that every time I cross the road, if I go 20 minutes out from my home and cross the road, cross the street, then I start getting panicky. Great, now we have a trigger. It's a little bit less of a convenient trigger because you have to leave your house. Hyperventilation, you can just do it at home, which is convenient. But in that case, okay, so then we'll have to work with that. So for example, now that we have a trigger, whether that's hyperventilation or going out there, let's just say crossing the street, now we have to find a way to titrate the exposure. How intensely are you going to feel it, right? We want to be able to break it down into steps, right? Step one, you feel a little bit of anticipation anxiety that you're approaching that danger zone. Step two, you feel more anticipation anxiety that you're approaching the danger zone. Step three, more, four more, five more, on and on until like step 10. By the way, it doesn't have to be 10 steps. I'm just kind of simplifying this stuff. So it could be 100 steps. That's the beauty of this exposure protocol, is that if at any point in time you're trying to move from step 1 to step 2 or from step 3 to step 4, and you're just finding the jump in difficulty too much, we can always break it down. That's the beauty of this. And so keep that in mind because that's going to be important. You want to make use of this principle. So then it's okay. So we have, let's just say we found a trigger. Maybe it's hyperventilation. Maybe it's something out there specific. And now we are looking to, and we found a way to break it down into manageable steps. The next thing is we have to identify our safety behaviors. And we also have to get very, very specific about the catastrophic thinking, right? So what sort of worries run through your mind when you think you are going crazy? Like what are the exact concerns? So one thing is I think I'm going crazy. What does that mean? Are you not perceiving reality correctly? So when there's people around you, you're worried that they're not actually existing. Is it something else? Is it more of a preoccupation with losing control? Like I'm afraid that like right now, as I'm existing in this moment, I'm sitting in this chair and I'm having thoughts that this could be literally the last few thoughts that I'm going to have, then the film is going to cut short and I'm just going to become somebody else, right? What are those fears? Or is it that you're just chilling here and, for example, you have this pen next to you and you're looking at this pen and you're thinking to yourself, oh my God, what if just all of a sudden I'm just going to take off the cap and stab myself in the eye, right? People have all kinds of preoccupations. If you can't relate to some of this, it might sound silly to you, but these are real preoccupations that people will develop when they have a panic disorder. It's just once we get certain things in our head, it can be sometimes hard to get it out. So once you've identified your safety behaviors and you've identified your preoccupations, we now got to get ready on how do we, let's just first, before I haven't expanded on the safety behaviors, I'll get to that in a second. But before I get there, let's finish talking about the preoccupations, right? So now you have a list of all your preoccupations. And by the way, though, if right now you're asking yourself, so like, what is that I really worry about, like specifically, and it doesn't come to mind, that's not uncommon. It's very common that during treatment, when I'm working with somebody who has this kind of a problem, or any kind of, it could be cardiac, could be respiratory, could be derealized, like you, I'm guessing, because you're watching this video, it's not uncommon for people to actually not be aware what specifically they are worried about. Do you know how we find out? We find out through the exposure process. So a lot of times it's just, in the process, in the moment, when you're having a panic attack, there's so much going on. Your body is just buzzing in all kinds of ways. Your mind is racing. And here's that trick. Here's that main point here, that your mind is racing. And a lot of times you will just have thoughts that happen so quickly that they'll freak you out. You'll register it on your very primitive reptilian brain part, so to speak. But you won't register it with your human part, the part that's conscious, that's aware. It's just they happen too quick, right? So a lot of times people might not be aware explicitly what their preoccupations are. So, but we can bring them to the surface a lot better. So we will approach the exposure. When we first approach the exposure, we'll do some very light exposure, right? So let's just say if you're hyperventilating, you might start with like 5 hyperventilation breaths. If you're, by the way, when you're doing hyperventilation breaths, one way to make sure you're doing it correctly is you should be getting lightheaded a little bit, a little tiny bit in the beginning, right? Later on, very lightheaded, but in the beginning, at least a little bit of lightheadedness, that gives you a good sign that you're hyperventilating correctly. But if hyperventilation is not your thing, it's not setting anything off for you, you've tried it, you get dizzy, and it just doesn't faze you, then we are probably working with some external thing, like so maybe you crossing the street, going into the park, going into, I don't know, whatever your thing is that typically sets off your panic attacks. Where was I going with this? I got myself lost. All right, I remember. When you start engaging in your exposure, you're starting with the lightest form of exposure, and you're doing it in a very mindful way. So one thing that we do before we even start treatment is we teach you a very basic mindfulness exercise. It's from ACT. It's all about noticing your sensations, but not getting attached to them, right? It's a way of observing your own thoughts and bodily sensations. Those are the most important things. There's all kinds of different ways you can do mindfulness meditation. You can focus on what you're hearing, you can focus on what you're seeing. But for the case of panic, in panic cases, the two sources of sensations or sources of input, data input, that are most relevant are your thoughts, so what you're saying to yourself, your catastrophic thinking, in other words, and your bodily sensations, because your bodily sensations, that's what we are building our catastrophic thinking off of. So sometimes we might not be aware, we might not be aware of some thoughts, but sometimes when we bring our attention to the bodily sensation, we might start becoming aware of why we are worried about that bodily sensation, and then that will clue us in as to what our catastrophic thinking is. So you approach this first exposure in a very mindful state so that you can start building awareness what you're really freaking out about, right? What kind of a catastrophe you're expecting to happen, right? So that's how we will then fill out this list of catastrophic thinking. Then, once we have the catastrophic thinking, we got to figure out how are we going to reality test this. That's a very important part, right? Because the reality testing is really that's what's going to give you part of your corrective experience. Another part of your corrective experience is removing safety behaviors. So everybody that has panic attacks engages in some type of a safety behavior. Safety behavior could be sipping water because I'm afraid I'm going to faint, and if I don't get enough water, I could faint. Safety behavior could be just repeating to yourself in a chanting way, I'm okay, I'm okay, I'm okay, I'm okay. Safety behavior could be just talking yourself down, trying to, maybe even praying. And here's what happens. When you rely on those safety behaviors, your brain registers that you only survived this panic attack. Nothing bad happened because you were doing those things. And so now you have to keep doing those things, and you never really, in order to feel safe-ish, even though you never really feel safe, because when you have a panic attack, you're not feeling safe, but you're thinking on some level in your mind, that you are surviving this experience because of those things that you were doing. And so that continues to maintain the problem. So safety behaviors have to be identified also, and then eventually phased out, not necessarily right off the bat, every single safety behavior, but little by little, we have to phase them out. And then the other thing that we do is we have to reality test that catastrophic thinking. So let's get to that, because that's probably the most pertinent part to this video. When it comes to derealized preoccupations, so I think I'm going crazy. Again, we have to really know exactly what your fear is and how you think you're going crazy. Like, what will be the signs of you going crazy? We have to really pinpoint your specific type of concern, because that can vary. A lot of these things can vary between people. There's a lot of similarities, right? But then how exactly we think this is going to unfold, we worry it will unfold, can vary from person to person. And we really want to make sure that the test we design to test whether this is actually going to happen or not fits your specific fear. So, for example, some people might worry that I'm about to just like lose my mental faculties. Like I'm just not going to be able to think. I'm going to be like a vegetable almost, or maybe like catatonic, like you see in the movies, you know, where people just like stare, right? So one reality test for that could be, I could ask you your name. So state your full name. Okay, so you still remember who you are. Cool. Let's test your long-term memory. Tell me about some cool fact you learned in history class, or maybe not even in history class, just some cool historical fact that just stands out to you. Take some time and think about it and then tell me about it. You'll be able to tell me something, right? But that's one way of testing whether you still have control or whether you still have your wits about you. Something else that we might do is I might ask you, let's see if you have forward-looking ability. Can you plan ahead? What's your plan for the rest of the day? And what's your plan tomorrow? What about after tomorrow? What are you going to be doing? If that's intact, great, awesome. I guess I'm not going crazy. I guess I'm not losing my sense of self. I'm still here, right? My past is here. My future is here. You can also check in with your present. What are you doing right now? You'll know what you're doing right now. I know my name. Something else that can be helpful sometimes is to, if you think you're not making sense, right? You can also check in with somebody else. Be like, hey, so Bob, your best friend Bob, like, hey Bob, so I feel like I'm kind of going crazy. I'm worried that I'm not making sense. Tell me if I'm making sense. And then you'll talk to Bob, and Bob will be like, yeah, you're making sense. You're fine. Okay. You just feel like maybe you're losing touch with reality. But really, why are you feeling that way? You're interpreting most likely your derealized symptoms. So again, derealization and depersonalization is a defense mechanism that's everybody has experienced. Like I don't think there's a person on this earth that has not had derealization, depersonalization, that sensation that you're here but you're not really here, right? It's meant to detach you from a highly stressful situation so you can actually function a little better. The problem is that you see that happening, you sense it happening, and you react to it with more stress because you think that this is actually a sign of something even worse happening, right? But you're actually just freaking out about freaking out. That's essentially what a panic attack is. Freaking out about having stress symptoms, because you interpret those stress symptoms as a sign of something terrible about to happen. So I think that kind of covered everything. Safety behaviors. Did I talk about safety behaviors? Safety behaviors. So I already talked about safety behaviors and that you got to phase them out. Yeah, that's pretty much it. That's pretty much in a nutshell. So what you do is, just to recap, you do the exposure. You start the lowest. You start reality testing. You remove as many safety behaviors as you can. Then you ask yourself, am I willing to try the next higher, more intensity level? If not, repeat the old level. If yes, move on to the next level. Repeat the process. Concerns will come up. Reality test them. See if you are actually, put them to the test. Reality testing is always an action thing. It's never like it rarely is like a mental, meditative head game kind of a thing. It's almost always some sort of an action that you're doing to see if you are actually, like a test, like a scientific test is the best way to put it, right? And you just rinse and repeat this every step of the way. You just keep going till you reach the final destination. No reference to that horror movie. Till you reach the highest level of your exposure that you've planned out for yourself. And by then you should be good. You should be good to go. So I hope that was helpful. I hope that clarified some things. I will see you in the next video.